Hi, this is Amanda Lynch. I'm the Director of the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society and a professor at the Department of Earth, Environmental and Planetary Sciences. What I'd like to talk about today is the sense of urgency that's been growing around issues of climate and environmental change in the United States and globally. Think about where this is coming from and what we might be able to do with this new urgency that's being expressed. What you can see here is the atmospheric carbon dioxide in parts per million. So it's starting from measurements in 1979. You can see that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere oscillates up and down every year. That's the planet breathing as plants uptake carbon dioxide through photosynthesis in the growing season. The balance flips over to more respiration, where they're breathing out carbon dioxide in the fall and the winter. But this natural balance that the biosphere provides for us has not been able to keep pace with the amount of carbon dioxide that we're emitting into the atmosphere as we develop industrial processes. And we've been measuring this in great detail, actually since the early 50s, but we can go back further than that, as we'll see in this graph. So in 1980, we started measuring this with a high degree of accuracy, but in fact, we had some stations earlier than that, going back to the late 50s, that were able to document this rise. And then we can go even further back through looking at the bubbles of ice that occur in ice cores in Antarctica and in Greenland, and develop estimates of carbon dioxide prior to the industrial age. And as you can see, it does naturally oscillate. It's never been as high as it is now during the period of time where human beings have evolved as a species and developed our culture. And so these levels that we're seeing of carbon dioxide, while they're not unprecedented in the Earth's history, they're certainly unprecedented in human history. And the response of the atmosphere to these changes we can see in estimates of, for example, global mean temperature. This is one of many measures that we can use to look at this response. What we can see here is temperature measured by meteorological instruments since the 1880s, globally averaged, and then expressed as what we call an anomaly, which is a difference from typically a 30-year average, in this case taken from around mid last century. And so what you can see then is the temperature, like carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, naturally goes up and down. It goes up and down during the day with the seasons, and indeed over kind of longer time periods. You can see we have cooler periods and warmer periods throughout the 20th century. But there is an inexorable rise that we can attribute through statistical means to the additional carbon dioxide that human beings are adding to the atmosphere. Because I'm a scientist, I work in metric, and so this is expressed as Celsius, degrees Celsius, but about 1 degree Celsius since 1980 is close to 2 degrees Fahrenheit. However, global mean temperature is not something that we as humans experience. In fact, it's the extremes of weather and climate that that represent the front line of symbols around climate change. And we can see in this graph, this is the number of loss events in the last 40 odd years. The geophysical events, the red parts of the bars have stayed pretty even every year, but what we're seeing is an increase in the events that we might expect to be associated with climate change that's caused by humans, whether that be heat waves, droughts, floods, hurricanes, or any other atmospheric, ocean, or land surface event. While no single one of these events it can be ascribed rigorously, scientifically to human agency, it becomes a symbol for the impact of human beings on the planet. So whether each event is a statistical quirk, an attributable event, or indeed an act of God, in any case, it becomes a story around which we can think about what climate change means for the condition. And this then feeds into the sense of existential insecurities that we're starting to feel over the last few years as the natural world is violating our expectations for continuing to sustain us as a species and to sustain our cultures, our practices, and our ongoing well-being and um, and processes of life. And so it is around this this violation of expectation that we are starting to see uh, a discourse or a series of stories in the media, in science, in other parts of the academy, among students about what does climate change really mean for us and what we do about it. And that naturally then brings into play a series of tensions and conflicts about how we develop that story. It's a conflict that we often think about is the conflict between ecological consciousness, which takes more of a kind of a Gaia approach to the entire planet as a living thing to be nurtured, and the kind of institutional managerialism, which is really thinking about things like environmental impact assessments and regulations and indeed, the valuation of ecological benefits for human economic activities. There are other kinds of conflicts that we see uh, going across the spectrum from denying that this has anything to do with human agency to trying to understand this from a place of very deep grief and anger. The important issue, though, is that in recognizing these human signals in the planetary system, we're actually constraining the questions that we're going to ask, the solutions we might consider pursuing, and the motivations that we might be able to engage in order to move those solutions forward. And so, how we talk about this phenomenon has a direct impact on what we can do about it. So, what I would like to propose, and something that we talk about a lot at the Institute, is the idea of allowing these tensions to coexist. So, we don't require that resolution of these conflicts actually occur. There is no one perspective, no one story that's right. we need the science, we need the grief, we need the anger. To a certain extent, we need the denial because that provides very strong motivations. We need all of these discourses, and we need to understand the place of values and beliefs from which they come. What we do demand, even through this practice of coexistence, is that we maintain um, a commitment to justice and human dignity, and that even as doctrines are irreconcilable at their most basic, that we embed the coexistence of those doctrines in those questions of justice. And in this approach, I'm always really inspired by the work of Deborah Bird-Rose, who worked a lot with Australian Indigenous people. And so I will leave you with this quote from Deborah, who says, "If our encounters situate us on a ground sufficiently shared to become meaningful and sufficiently differentiated to become provocative, what may erupt?" Thank you.